Okay, so I'm in my quiet time this morning, and the Lord showed me John 1. In John 1, Jesus calls Peter, but he doesn't call him Peter. He says, Simon, son of John, you are called Simon, you will be called Peter. And I just got this little nudge in my spirit that said, this is how I begin my relationships with people. I tell them who they are because I want them to know I see them for who they are now and still love them enough to call them. But also, I see the Peter, not the Simon. Peter means rock, and Peter would be what Jesus would tell him later. Peter would be the rock on which Christ would build his church. And yet, throughout the entire 4 Gospels, Jesus calls him, as do the disciples, Simon Peter. He is referenced to in the 3.5 years of Jesus' ministry as Simon Peter. And God just showed me there's a tension between who we were and who we are becoming. Simon Peter is an indication in the text that God is trying to show us he understands and knows fully who we are as a person when he calls us, but he also sees the Peter in us and accepts the fact that there is a tension to the transition. Because there's a tension to the transition, Jesus doubles down on this. And the gospel is so impactful because I then read John 21, where after Jesus' resurrection, he cooks breakfast for the disciples. And when he asks, Simon, do you love me? He doesn't ask Peter, do you love me? He asks Simon, do you love me? 3 times. So when he says, Simon, do you love me? I just felt this in my spirit that God was saying, hey, Jesus is reminding him. He's reminding Simon Peter, hey, listen, remember, you're about to become the rock of my church. Don't get too prideful, because I called you when you were Simon. I called you when you were just a fisherman. Now you are going to become a fisher of men. Jesus knew 10 days from then that Peter would preach his trial sermon and 3,000 people would come to Jesus. So it's almost like Jesus was trying to make sure that Simon knew Jesus knows the Simon and his love still called him. So many times when we're in our journey, it's like he calls him Peter when he's Simon to call him up. But when he's close to becoming Peter, the rock on which Jesus' church is built on, he wants to make sure that pride doesn't creep in. I also find it interesting that as I was reading the text this morning, God just prompted me, the Holy Spirit just prompted me to remember when Peter denied Jesus 3 times. It's interesting because so many of us think that what we do in the tension of the transition will deter us from the destination that we give up. So many of us are not pursuing the Peter that is within us because of the acts we do in the transition. If Jesus called Peter the rock of his church, knowing he would deny him, Jesus has enough love for you to know that you are not going to operate in perfection in the process. And so many of us don't pursue anything in terms of godly ambition because all we know is Simon. We have these visions of what our life could be. We have these visions of what Jesus could do to and through us, and yet we lessen ourselves. We step back. We don't operate in boldness. We don't step out. We don't step up. All because all we know of ourselves is Simon. And Jesus is saying, you will be called Peter. I wonder how many people on this planet right now Jesus is saying, you will be called Peter. And you get fired up and you get pumped up and you get excited, and then the world calls you, thank you, Holy Spirit, the world keeps calling you Simon. The world keeps calling you by your name that they know you by. The world keeps treating you based on the person that you are now, not the person that you are called to be. And because the world keeps treating you that way, and they keep calling you by that name, you start to call yourself by that name again. And you start to act like you are that person. And you start to react. And your relationships are that way. And your actions are that way. And your habits are that way. And you talk like that. And you walk like that. And your schedule looks like that. You spend your time like that. Your relationships are like that. When God is telling you, you need to start acting like Peter. Because the transition matters. Who you will become is what God sees. Who you are is what you see. So my challenge to us today, my challenge to me today, is to pray that Jesus would show us through the mighty power of the Holy Spirit at work within us, that Jesus would show us how to operate as Peter, not as Simon, while also giving ourselves the grace to know that there is a transition that is happening, and in that transition will be tension. If we don't know that there will be tension in the transition, we will get frustrated and give up. If we don't know that there will be tension in the transition, we will get frustrated and give in. We will step back. We will lower ourselves. We will sink back into being Simon. My challenge to me and my challenge to you is step into the boldness of being Peter. Step into the boldness and the willingness to see ourselves from the perspective and the lens that Jesus called Simon to be when he said, you will be Peter. I'm speaking to myself, and I'm speaking to anyone on the other end of this video, that you will be the rock of your story. And until we own that, we are at the risk of shrinking back to being Simon. And when we do own that, and we step up and we have this revelation, and we operate in this revelation, and we operate with the knowledge and the knowing that we are great and we are somebody that Jesus needs to use and trust. Once we operate that, we must also understand that Jesus called us when we were Simon, and not let our pride step in and say, I'm better than. My challenge to us today as I pull into my church on a Sunday morning is, I hope and pray, and I'm asking you to pray, that God would give you the revelation to show you who he calls you to be, and give yourself the grace to operate in the tension of the transition as you are becoming. I hope this message blesses you like it blessed me this morning. I hope you have an amazing Sunday or Saturday or whatever day you're watching this. And I hope and pray that God uses this message to show you how he wants